Hello beautiful people, welcome back to the channel. Today I've decided to do my first ever retro review, starting with a big one, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And what might make this even a bit more interesting is that this is a fully blind review, not just of Symphony of the Night, but Castlevania as a series in general. Yeah, I've never played a Castlevania game in my life despite being a massive Metroid fan, but I figured it was about time for me to go back and see what this coveted franchise has to offer. But before we dive into the review, I would just like to note that as of the recording of this video, we have 102 subscribers. Guys, we gained 10 subs since the last upload and we broke past the 100 sub barrier. Shoutouts to you guys, let's keep it going. But without further ado, we can now ask the question, is Castlevania Symphony of the Night truly a masterpiece? So the game kicks off with the ending of the previous. Vampire hunter and bearer of the Belmont family name, Richter Belmont, comes face to face with Count Dracula himself. Now the dialogue was surprisingly campy, and I wouldn't necessarily consider the voice acting to be top tier, but there's some great stuff in this opening cutscene.
I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Tribute? You steal men's souls and make them your slaves.
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
The character designs and atmosphere are also epic, and despite being new to the series, that much I expected. But oh my goodness, I had no idea the soundtrack went this fucking hard. Alright, let's see what this is all about. Whoa. Whoa. Okay. I get used to this. Oh my god. Based on the limited clips and screenshots I had seen over the years, I 100% thought that Castlevania leaned more into its horror aesthetic, that maybe it would host some melancholy dark tunes. Turns out it's a campy action romp filled to the brim with gothic scenery and horrific monsters, and I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. Now from a story perspective, I was aware of Richter Belmont's existence prior to jumping into this game, thanks mostly to Yes, I know, I'm one of those people today. But even with no prior knowledge of Castlevania, I don't think I would have been lost in the slightest with the story that's laid out for us. A great warrior clashes with Dracula, Dracula is very powerful, and only with the help of a companion is Richter able to achieve the strength necessary to defeat him. We are then delivered a pretty hefty scroll of plot exposition. This retells everything that I assumed from the previous cutscene, and we also learn that the warrior Richter Belmont has mysteriously disappeared. Castlevania, which I learned is the name of the castle, has suddenly emerged, and Dracula's vampire-human hybrid of a son has awakened to investigate the matter. And so with that, we're on our way. You, as Alucard, are tasked with exploring the depths of the castle. Now I quickly want to reflect on my opening hours. Once again, this was my first time with the series, and with that comes a bit of a learning curve. And I won't sugarcoat this next part. The game was kicking my ass pretty regularly at first. In my opening hours, I felt like I spent more time listening to than making any tangible progress. I feel as though I hadn't quite mastered the movement, was still unsure of several of the game's systems, and as I learned later on, sometimes it's best to just take your time, grind some levels, or hunt for more rare equipment before trying to push through that next big obstacle. Without any sort of guide, learning the different button inputs, discovering each ability, and even adjusting to the gameplay loop in general slowed me down despite being very familiar with the Metroid series and how those games operate. Through trial and error, I had to learn how to use my sub-weapons, the fact that some swords have special moves if you put in proper combos, or how to morph into different animals and spectral fog. But what was most initially jarring was the UI. So in the top left portion of our screen, we have a big blue bar, which I assumed was magic, a small icon with a bottle inside, I had no idea what that was, and two distinct numbers. One was labeled HP, while the other was placed next to a heart icon, which completely baffled me. It's funny looking back on it now, having beaten the game, but I seriously questioned which of these values was health, and if one of them was surely my health, what the hell the other number was meant to be. On top of that, neither of the two values were maxed out at 100, the standard amount of health one might expect to have at the beginning of a new game. So it took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure out that the number next to your hearts was actually ammunition for your sub-weapon, which I still don't totally understand, and the number next to your HP was, well, your HP. But rookie Looney Tunes would take significant damage, spend the next couple of minutes farming hearts from the lampposts with the idea that I was replenishing my health, only to get one-shotted in the next room. Stupid. I was really quite frustrated. I thought that because I had played and mastered so many Metroid games that I should be able to pick up and play Symphony of the Night no problem at all. But if I had just stopped for 2 seconds to test some things out, it would have been a cinch. But instead, I ran headfirst into the castle as if I were trying to speedrun the damn game.
Oh, it's a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, chums up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!
Oh my god, he just ran in.
Turns out, the only way to replenish your health is by eating food, using a potion, or best of all, reaching a save room for maximum restoration. And your maximum health and ammunition steadily increase as you level up, defeat bosses, and find upgrades throughout the castle, my health reaching well over 500 by the end. So I actually ended up running through the first half of the game twice, because I flubbed up and deleted my save file. But it was on that second run that it became clear to me the game really wasn't that difficult. It was just my unfamiliarity and approach that needed a little bit of fine-tuning. But alright, I've spent 5 to 6 hours with the game, feeling much more comfortable, I'm familiar with the different systems and gameplay loop, and I'm making steady progress. And one of the first great things that I picked up on was that the movement and combat felt phenomenal. The platforming is just as buttery smooth and intuitive as the greatest of Metroid games. Alucard has great control in the air, and there are many abilities you gain throughout the game to stack onto this, like the double and high jump. Plus, he has this backward dash that you can use to avoid incoming attacks or as a means of faster travel. It became second nature for me to see a long stretch of flat surfaces, quickly turn my character around and mash the dodge button. Oddly satisfying, and I'd like to envision that this is canon to the series, and Alucard just gives that few fucks. As far as the combat is concerned, your strikes are so fast and deliberate. It can feel extremely precise, down to the very pixel it would seem. After so long with the game, you really get in a rhythm with your jumps, dashes, and sword swings. Through constant repetition, you become incredibly attuned with your weapon, and the distance that it can reach or at the speed at which it swings, which becomes very important when you're trying to squeeze just one poke of damage in between enemy attacks. It really feels like your weapon is simply an extension of your body after so many hours with the game. But if there's one major gripe I have, it's that the list of available weapons is extremely limited. Swords, maces, whatever the heck a shield rod is, that's about it. They all swing generally the same way as well, aside from a few special attacks limited to specific weapons, so if you're looking for different playstyle varieties, you're not likely to find it here. But let's quickly check back in with our story. We have several encounters with a woman named Maria in the castle. She claims to be an ally and is searching for Richter Belmont. Alucard is standoffish at first, but eventually comes to trust and assist her the further we progress. The relationship isn't all that deep, but it feels authentic, and Maria is always a welcome sight in this dreary castle. However, a bit of a twist occurs when we enter a boss arena to find Richter Belmont. Although it would appear that he has switched alliances, as he calls forth 2 powerful demons for you to battle. When told of this, Maria cannot believe it, assuming it to be some sort of trick.
There is a Belmont here. You were right about that.
I knew it. Where is he?
The one I saw was with the enemy. He called himself the Lord of this castle.
What? That's impossible. You're wrong. I have to go.
And I have to say, this was a mystery that definitely had me hooked. Was this an illusion, brainwashing, or by some crazy string of events has he truly turned to the dark side? But alright, shifting gears once again because I can't hold back any longer. I need to gush about this incredible Metroidvania level design. In the Metroidvania genre, level design is king. It's a genre that generally hosts a massive open map, with locked doors or obstacles that the player will pass up and return to later once they've found a key or unlocked a new ability. Metroidvanias are more akin to open world games than they are to linear chapter progression. Players can backtrack at will and may pass through the same set of rooms a dozen times throughout their playthrough. And for the more creative and intelligent players, objectives can even be completed out of order at times, essentially breaking the game's intended loop with methods known as sequence breaks. But with this in mind, it's ultimately up to the developers to gently lead the player in the right direction as often as possible without abruptly holding their hand or pulling them through it. It's a very subtle dance, a perfect balance of developer-led navigation and player freedom of choice. You want to give the player as much autonomy as possible while also trying to prevent them from getting lost or feeling confused, not knowing what to do or where to go next. Needless to say, this is incredibly difficult, and yet Symphony of the Night pulls it off in spades. Every discovery felt earned, like I had been the one to carve my path through this castle, and yet at the same time, I also felt as though I was always on the rails the developers set out for me. It really is one of the most impressive game worlds I have ever seen, not just in the genre of Metroidvanias, but video games in general. But I'll have to explain why that is a bit later. But very quickly, why don't we go over some dislikes? Frankly, it's a pretty short list. Number 1, there's no way to place map markers. This is definitely a product of the times. Modern Metroidvanias have begun to use markers so that you can easily save points of interest on your map, but these kinds of systems just weren't around back then. Would have been pretty iconic if they added this feature though. Number 2, item swapping, wouldn't you know it, another product of the times, is a total pain in the ass. This was an issue with basically every RPG back in the 90s, an absolutely massive list of items in your inventory, and anytime you want to find something specific, you squint your eyes as you carefully pan through. This really takes the wind out of my sails when I'm knee-deep in an epic boss fight and I'm constantly having to pause the game, search for a healing potion, cross shuriken, or an elemental immunity buff. Not something that could be easily avoided back then, but a con is a con. And number 3, the devs got a little too cute when it comes to some of their environmental puzzles. There's a pretty infamous one in the clock tower where you have to use a stopwatch sub-weapon in order to trigger a door to open. There's absolutely no indication of this other than the fact that a stopwatch and clock tower are both clocks. It's one of those things that after I looked it up online, yeah, it made sense, but in the moment, I wouldn't have thought to try that in a billion years. There's also a bit of tedium when it comes to unlocking the true ending of the game. I'll come right out and say it, there are 3 different endings that you can get with Alucard. The bad ending, good ending, and best ending, each of which are unlocked by completing the game when certain conditions are met. And in my personal experience, this is where several hours of tedium really hit me hard. I spoke earlier about how perfect the level design is and how well the developers did when it came to guiding the player. And while I still fully stand by those statements, this was just a 1 to 2 hour stretch of a 10-hour game that is marred by poorly laid out clues and indication as to what I needed to do next. Frankly, I would have wasted countless hours aimlessly wandering about the castle if not for an online guide. And I promise you, I only resorted to these guides twice in desperate situations. Because as it turns out, first, you need to collect the silver ring from the royal chapel, but the hallway is blocked by an array of spikes with no way to pass, which is why I also needed the Spikebuster armor. But the armor is located in a dark cavern, which I can only access with the bat sonar ability. Tower with and the silver and gold rings tucked away in the far reaches of the castle. Up a passage. There's also a wooden bridge to be burned, so go past the waterfall to go forget. You also need to go past the gold ring. Opens up a passage. That makes underground on the bridge to almost wet my face. Now it's time to got the bat. Anyways, now it's time with the silver and gold rings donned. Doing this opens up a passage which leads me directly to Maria, who then gives me the holy glasses. Did you get all that? And I will clarify, it's not really the tedium that bothered me, but the lack of instruction and clear-ish idea of where I needed to go. I'd say every other item in this game felt pretty natural to stumble across due to the game's great design, but obtaining the gold and silver rings were just a bit too obtuse, at least during my initial playthrough. But to reiterate, this was a small portion to what was otherwise a fantastic Metroidvania experience. Getting back to some positives, here's another aspect of the game that truly blew me away: the enemy variety. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a whopping 146 different enemy types in this game, sporting, once again, a whopping 23 boss encounters in what is essentially a 10-hour game. What the fuck? Each of these enemies sport a unique design with only a handful of color swap variations here and there. Each have unique animations and attack patterns. Some are large, some are very, very small, and I have to say that very few of these enemies ever felt like they were unnecessary, boring to fight, or overly frustrating to encounter, except for these motherfuckers. Please eat shit and die.
Eat shit and die.
The designs are beautiful and occasionally really messed up and creepy. And this goes doubly for the bosses, just another absolutely insane feat all around. Allow me to go over a couple of the standout bosses for your viewing pleasure. First up, the Doppelganger, an exact clone of Alucard, sporting high mobility and aerial attacks, and the only way to win is to fight fire with fire. The boss's design may not be anything too notable, but the speed is electric, and it teaches you valuable lessons and techniques that you will utilize for the rest of the game. For me, this is when the combat really started to click and was expertly placed in the early game for that purpose. Next up, the Three Warriors. In this sanctum, you find 3 coffins with the remains of what appears to be former champions of humanity. A mage, an assassin, and a once proud warrior defeated in their own times, they are now the undead slaves of Count Dracula and will fight tooth and nail against anyone who opposes their master. They fight you 3-1 using magic, guerrilla tactics, and brute strength, which for the skillful and deadly Alucard sounds like a fair fight. Third on our list goes to Legion. Ah yes, a mass of undead corpses, seemingly glued together by some dark ritual, perhaps a blueprint for other games to latch onto. They scream and claw as you methodically hack them to pieces. Each major slice of damage sends bodies flying as they rise again for one last desperate attack. The grotesque sight, sounds, and chaotic atmosphere made for an extremely memorable fight. And lastly, the Succubus, a mistress of trickery and temptation. She brings Alucard into a nightmarish illusion in an attempt to break his spirit. Showing him warped memories of his mother's death, she fails in entrapping his mind and instead brings upon his wrath.
Darkling, I smell your blood, your hunger. That strength, that beauty. You really are the son of Lord Dracula.
Death in the dream world will set your soul wandering for eternity, demon.
Wait! I beg of you!
She begs for her life in the end, but has already sealed her own fate. This fight may not have been the most challenging or even all that fun, if I'm being honest, but it was coupled with an amazing cutscene and character moment that took me by complete surprise. And here's just a couple of other positives before we move on. The smaller details in animation are really nice, like the flow of Alucard's cape, the after image that trails you with every movement, even how gently he glides over the ground a bit when he's turning. Subtle reminders that Alucard is a mythical being of sorts, deriving from both human and vampire lineage. The sound design is also extremely memorable, from the ticks that play as you sort through the game's menus to the different shrieks given off by your enemies as you cut them down. Years from now, I bet you could play me a single soundbite from this title and I would be able to instantly recognize it. And lastly, I'll speak on the environmental variety. Each sports a unique color palette, architecture, catchy soundtracks, and varied enemy types depending on the setting. You'll find skeletons in the catacombs and flying enemies on the castle roof. Adds a sense of liveliness to the different regions, and I can't really speak negatively on any environmental designs. So as I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of different endings to this game, and we should start with the first one you're likely to run into, the bad ending. In this scenario, you make your way to the throne room and find Richter in a crazed state. He wishes to resurrect Lord Dracula so they may clash once again, as this gives his life purpose.
Dracula rises once a century. One chance for each Belmont to shine, and then we're finished. Forgotten. If I bring him back now, the battle can last for eternity.
The battle ensues, and it's honestly not a very good one. Richter is a goddamn maniac in this fight, flying all over the place, swinging with a pretty good range on his chain whip. He had a habit of combo locking me in a corner, and it was just a bit of a mess to get out of sometimes. After a couple of deaths, I opted just to use every consumable weapon item that I had collected to that point. Absolutely shredded his ass with magical arrows. Once Richter is defeated, the castle crumbles and fades away with no real finality and a very brief dialogue section from Alucard. It just felt extremely abrupt. Not realizing at the time that this was not the true ending, I was shocked. I felt as though I had only put 4 to 5 hours in and I was done. This is heralded as one of the greatest games of all time. I mean, it was good, but with an ending like that, for real? And that is when the clouds parted, a heavenly light shone from above, and Google informed me that this was not, in fact, the true ending of the game. Now, this was exciting until I discovered the difficulties of unlocking the true ending, which I detailed earlier, but if you collect the silver and gold rings and wear them inside the clock tower, a passage will open. This path leads to yet another meeting with Maria, where she gifts you the holy glasses. With the glasses equipped, you can challenge Richter yet again, only this time you'll see a floating green orb above his head. Destroy the orb, and a dark mage known as Shaft will appear. It became clear that he had placed Richter under some sort of magical mind control. Richter is now free, but the ceremony to resurrect Dracula has already begun. And this is when things get buck wild. That's right, a second Castlevania has appeared, nearly identical to the first, with Dracula housed in its core. Your map is wiped clean, and you're tasked with clearing the castle once again, only this time upside down.
What the actual fuck did you just say to me right now?
Only this time upside down.
Get out of my sight. Get out of my sight.
Yeah, so essentially the map that you've become so familiar with during the first half of the game has been flipped on its head. New and more challenging enemies have been added, along with additional hidden abilities and health upgrades. I really can't express just how absurd this is. Not only did the developers create a near-perfect Metroidvania-style world, but they crafted one that works just as well upside down. That means they were essentially creating 2 of these maps simultaneously. Everything they changed about one version of the castle would affect the other and vice versa. To even attempt this is a disturbing thought, but to then pull it off with such grace is absolutely disgusting. I feel that this has to be one of the most monumental achievements in video game map design, and frankly, I'm a bit upset that more people don't talk about it. So another round we go, pushing deep into the castle, slaying more demonic creatures and bosses, collecting key items, and uncovering hidden passages until we finally reach the center of our conflict.
Well met, my son. It's been a long time.
Not nearly long enough. I can't allow you to leave here, Father.
Do you still side with humanity? Have you forgotten what they did to your mother?
You think I would forget such a... No, but neither do I seek revenge against them.
Enough of your nonsense! Away with your humanity! Stand with me as Prince of all the world!
You will never touch this world again. In Mother's name, I swear it.
The fight has a great sense of weight behind it all. Father and son clash, not just physically, but ideologically as well. Alucard fights for all of humanity as his mother would have wanted, while Dracula battles so that he may reshape the world in his own image and take revenge on the humans who took his beloved wife from him. Dracula takes a grotesque form and swings wildly with massive claws and long-ranged magical attacks, but they're no match for the nimble Alucard and his own repertoire of vampiric tricks. After a struggle, it is decided. Alucard is victorious, and the parting words to his father actually seem to leave an impact.
have lost.
You lost your heart, your soul. You'll never win without them.
Ah, how poetic. So, I tragically sacrificed all I held dear in a search for power, did I?
Did you not?
Tell me, what were Lisa's last words?
She said, "Do not hate humans. If you cannot live with them, then at least do them no harm, for theirs is already a hard lot." She also said that she would love you for eternity.
Lisa, forgive me. Farewell, my son.
The castle crumbles away, and we get a lasting dialogue between the surviving trio. In this version of the events, Alucard leaves to find an eternal resting place so that his kind may never torment the likes of man again. Richter and Maria look on with reverence. But in the best ending of the game, there is but a slight change. Instead of going off on his own, Maria chases after Alucard with some apparent romantic interest. It's left a bit open-ended, and I never really got a romantic vibe between the two of them, so I choose to believe it was simply platonic. But that's it. Dracula is defeated, and Castlevania is no more for at least another century. So aside from a learning curve and a bit of a tedious middle section, I really can't praise this game enough. Its legendary status and accolades are well met, completely deserved. It's a game I feel I will revisit many times down the line, although nothing will compare to that first run. But with the success of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, I guess I have no other choice but to visit some of the other entries in this coveted series. But ladies and gentlemen, with everything I have laid out for you here today, surely we can all come together and agree that Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a masterpiece. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Just like the wind, I've always been drifting high up in a sky that never ends. Through thick and thin, I always win, 'cause I will fight both life and death to save a friend. I face my destiny every day I live, and the best of me is all I have to give. Just like the sun